On the 11th of May, in the year 330, a Roman emperor stood on the edge of Europe and named a city after himself. He did not know it would stand 1,100 years. He did not know everyone inside it would call themselves Romans until the very last morning. Three images before we begin. The golden horn at dawn, the water actually golden, the dome of a great church, the walls of a vanished palace, the rooftops of a city that called itself the Queen of the World, all of it catching the first light at once. A foreign fleet burning on the Bosphorus at night, fire running across the surface of the water as if water could not put it out. An old man, alone, in a stone corridor at the edge of his own city, tearing something purple from his own shoulders. We call them Byzantines. They never did. For 11 centuries, they called themselves Romans. The word Byzantine was invented by a German scholar in the year 1557, more than 100 years after the empire was already gone. They never heard it. They would not have answered to it. How long can an empire last when it changes its language, its religion, its borders, and even its idea of God every 2 centuries, and still calls itself by the same name? How many times can a civilization almost die and wake up the next morning? What does it mean to be the last Roman, when Rome itself fell 1,000 years ago? This is the story of the empire that survived the empire. The civilization that took the inheritance of Greece, the law of Rome, and the faith of Jerusalem, and held the three of them together for 1,123 years. It survived a plague that killed half its capital. It survived 7 centuries of war on every border. In 1204, it was conquered by its own allies, and somehow rose again. And then, on a Tuesday morning in May of 1453, an old man with a sword in his hand tore the imperial purple from his own shoulders, looked once at what was left of his soldiers, ran toward a gap in a wall, and disappeared into it. His body was never found. No one ever came forward with it. No one ever proved who had killed him. This is the story of how Rome ended for real, 400 years after Rome ended. A man stands on the parapet of a half-built wall, looking east into a wind that smells of salt. He is wearing a soldier's cloak over a soldier's tunic. He has just won a civil war that lasted 13 years, and he has spent the last weeks walking the perimeter of a Greek colony on the Bosphorus, deciding where the new walls will go. His name is Constantine. He has decided to leave Rome behind. Rome is too far from the frontiers. Rome is full of senators who still remember the old gods and resent the new one. Rome, as far as a soldier emperor is concerned, is both an inheritance and a problem. So he has chosen another place, a small Greek colony founded almost 1,000 years earlier by merchants from Megara. Its name is Byzantium. It sits on a triangular peninsula between 3 bodies of water with sheer cliffs on 2 sides and a single approachable wall on the 3rd. A man can close that wall and feed the city forever from the sea. He calls it Nea Roma, New Rome. The people will call it Constantinople, the city of Constantine, and that is the name that will stick. For 40 days in May of the year 330, he holds games and gives gold and dedicates the city. He strips statues from temples across the Mediterranean to decorate it. From Delphi, he takes the serpent column, raised by the Greeks to celebrate the day in 479 before Christ, when they had broken the Persian army at Plataea. He has it dragged across the sea and planted in the spine of his new hippodrome. That column is still standing. It outlived the empire that brought it. 900 years after Constantine raised it in his forum, the Ottomans rode past it on the morning Constantinople fell. Even now, in present-day Istanbul, the bronze coil leans on the same patch of ground. Constantine does not know any of this. He thinks he is reorganizing the empire he has inherited. What he is actually doing is beginning a second Rome, one that will survive the first by 1,000 years. The first generation in the city still speaks Latin in the palace. None of their grandchildren will. A clerk is sitting at a desk in the imperial chancellery, dipping a reed pen into ink, copying out a decree. The decree is in Latin. The clerk is not. His mother spoke Greek. His grandfather spoke Greek. Everyone in the harbor outside the window speaks Greek. But the decree is in Latin because the empire is Latin, because Rome was Latin, because that is how the law has always been written. It is the year 590. The clerk does not know it, but his grandson will copy decrees in Greek. For 2 centuries after Constantine, Latin holds on by inertia. The decrees of the empire are issued in Latin. The legions count off in Latin. The senators in the new Senate House argue in Latin. But the streets outside are Greek. The merchants in the harbor are Greek and Syrian and Armenian, and they have no use for the language of a fading Western capital. Latin retreats, first from the markets, then from the courts, then from the army. In the year 610, an emperor named Heraclius takes the throne. He has come to power as a young exile from Carthage, sailing into Constantinople with a fleet to overthrow a tyrant. Within a few years, he makes the change official. From now on, the language of the empire will be Greek. The man giving the order will no longer be called imperator. He will be called Basileus, king. But here is the thing he does not change: the name of the state. In every edict, in every coin, in every treaty signed with a Persian Shah or an Arab caliph or a Frankish king, the name is the same: Imperium Romanum, Basileia ton Romaion, the empire of the Romans. When a Bulgarian envoy arrives in the city, he is greeted by Romans. When a Viking trader rows his boat down to the Black Sea and into the Bosphorus, he trades with Romans. When 8 centuries later, an Ottoman sultan will write a letter to the emperor inside the walls, the letter is addressed to the emperor of Rome. The Romans, they never stop. Not when they speak Greek, not when they pray in Greek, not when the only Latin left in the city is carved on the columns Constantine had brought from Italy. They are Romaioi, Romans. They know it. Everyone around them knows it. We are the ones who decided otherwise. In the year 527, a Macedonian peasant became emperor of the Romans. His name was Justinian. He was the nephew of an old soldier named Justin, who had risen from the ranks to wear the purple, and who had no children of his own. The nephew was the heir. He was studious, sleepless, suspicious. The court called him the emperor who never sleeps. He worked through the night reading petitions by lamp. He ate little. He distrusted almost everyone. Almost. There was one person. Her name was Theodora. Before she met Justinian, she had been an actress in the Hippodrome. Not a tragic actress, the lowest kind. She performed in pantomimes that the chronicler Procopius would later describe in language so obscene that English translators left the worst passages in Latin so that respectable readers would not understand them. She had been a courtesan. She had a daughter by an unknown father. She was, by every law of the Roman state, the kind of woman an emperor could not marry. Justinian changed the law. He passed a statute allowing repentant actresses to marry men of senatorial rank. Then he married her. When he became emperor, he made her empress, not consort, empress, co-ruler, Augusta. Her name appears beside his on coins, on edicts, on the laws of the empire. He never made a major decision without consulting her. The court understood. The bishops understood. They did not have to like it. What Justinian wanted was simple and impossible. He wanted to take back the West. He wanted to reunite the Mediterranean under Roman law, Roman coin, and Roman God. The Western Empire had fallen 50 years before he was born. The barbarians sat on the throne of Italy. The Vandals held North Africa. The Visigoths held Spain. He started with North Africa. Belisarius was 29 years old, the youngest general in the empire, brilliant and careful, and loyal in a court where loyalty was rare. Justinian put him on a fleet with 18,000 men and sent him across the sea. In a single summer, he broke the Vandal kingdom that had held the African coast for 100 years. The reconquest of Italy would take 20 more and almost work. Almost. The word that runs through everything that happens next. A charioteer is leaning forward over the rail of his car, watching the white sand of the hippodrome blur under the hooves of his 4 horses. It is the 13th of January, the year 532. The crowd on his side, the Blues, is on its feet. The crowd on the other side, the Greens, is on its feet. They are screaming the same word at him, Nika, Nika, victory. It is the word the charioteers shout at the finishing line. By the end of the day, it will mean something else. Constantinople was a city of factions. The Blues and the Greens were not just sports clubs. They were neighborhoods, political parties, street gangs. They hated each other so completely that no emperor in memory had put them in the same room without blood. On this morning, they did something they had never done before. They agreed. By the second day, half the city was on fire. The Senate was burning. The old church of Hagia Sophia was burning. The mob had a candidate. They dragged a frightened nobleman named Hypatius into the hippodrome, sat him in the imperial box, and crowned him with a gold chain. In the palace, Justinian was packing. The treasury was already on the ships. The advisors were arguing about which port. The emperor was preparing to flee his own capital, and one room away, an actress was listening. Theodora stood up. The chroniclers say there were 20 men in the room, all senior, all sitting. She stood, and she said, in the version Procopius preserved, "For one who has reigned, it is unbearable to be a fugitive. May I never be parted from this purple. May I never live to see the day when those I meet do not call me mistress. As for me, I hold with the old saying, the purple is a fine shroud." Nobody fled. Belisarius and Mundus locked the 2 gates of the hippodrome. The eunuch Narses walked into the stands alone with a sack of gold and bought back the Blues. By nightfall, the gates had not opened, and the racetrack was very quiet. Hypatius was strangled and thrown into the sea. Justinian had his city back. He owed it to a woman the law had said he could not marry. Justinian is walking through the burned shell of the old church. There is ash on his boots. The roof beams have collapsed across the nave, and the morning light is coming in through the wreckage at angles the architects had never planned. He is 50 years old. He is looking up. He has decided what comes next. The old Hagia Sophia, the one the Nika rioters had burned, was a wooden basilica. He does not want a basilica. He wants something the world has never seen. He does not hire architects. He hires 2 mathematicians. Anthemius of Tralles writes treatises on conic sections and parabolic mirrors. Isidore of Miletus has taught geometry in Alexandria and physics in Constantinople and has spent years studying Archimedes and Heron, the engineers who had written about how an arch holds up the impossible. Justinian puts 10,000 workmen under their hands and tells them to build a roof that hangs from the sky. It takes 5 years. On the 27th of December, 537, the doors open. The dome is 101 feet across, 160 feet high. It rests on 4 pendentives, 4 curved triangles of stone that transfer the weight of the dome onto 4 piers, and from the piers into the bedrock of the city. From the floor, the pendentives are almost invisible. The dome looks as if it is floating. 40 windows ring the base of it, and on a clear morning, the light comes through them in 40 shafts and meets in the center of the church, and a man standing under it cannot see what is holding it up. The first dome falls in 558. They build a higher one in 562, and that dome is still there. A later tradition says that on the day of the dedication, Justinian walks alone into the church, looks up, and says, in Greek, "Solomon, I have outdone thee. The line may be invented. It does not matter." Solomon had built a temple to hold the presence of God. Justinian has built a roof under which the presence of God lives in suspension. Today, 3 layers cover the inside of the dome. The original gold of Justinian, a medieval Christ painted over the gold, an Islamic medallion painted over the Christ. None of them was ever fully removed. All 3 are still there, layered, present at once. That is, in the end, what Hagia Sophia is. The empire that survived the empire, written on a ceiling. We have watched a Roman emperor build a new Rome on the edge of Europe, and a peasant from Macedonia and an actress from the Hippodrome turn that city into the largest church in the world. From here, the story gets harder to find. The empire is about to become the empire that everyone else writes about. Persian ambassadors, Arab generals, Frankish crusaders, Latin chroniclers who did not speak the language of the city they were describing. The Romans of the East are about to become the most documented, misunderstood civilization in history. Watch carefully whose voice you are hearing, and keep one thing in mind. 1,000 years from now, in our story, on a Tuesday morning in May, an old man with a sword in his hand is going to tear the purple cloth from his own shoulders, run toward a gap in a wall, and disappear into it. To get to him, we have to walk through 3 different ends of the world: a plague, a war for Jerusalem, a crusade that turns its own knives on its allies. It begins on a wharf in Egypt. A sailor is leaning against a pile of grain sacks, sweating in a way that has nothing to do with the heat. He doesn't know it yet, but the rats in the hold of the ship behind him are about to rewrite the Mediterranean. A sailor is leaning against a pile of grain sacks on a wharf at Pelusium, at the eastern mouth of the Nile. It is the summer of 541. He is not feeling well. There is a knot under his arm that was not there yesterday. He thinks it is from lifting. The men around him are loading the ship for Constantinople, and he goes back to work. Within a week, he is gone. So are most of the men he had been working beside. The grain ships do not stop. They never do. The empire runs on Egyptian wheat, and the wheat goes where it always goes, to Antioch, to Alexandria, to Constantinople. The rats that live in the holds go with it. By the spring of 542, the plague has reached the capital. Procopius, who saw it, says 10,000 died in a day at the worst of it. Then 12. Then 16. The gravediggers ran out of ground. The corpses were piled in the towers of the city walls until the towers were full. And then They were piled in the streets. There was no procession. There was no liturgy. The bishop did not come. Justinian himself caught it. He went to bed and did not get up for 3 weeks. The court began the quiet work of choosing his successor. After 3 weeks, he opened his eyes. He survived. He was the only thing about that summer that did. By the end of the first wave, somewhere close to half the people in Constantinople were gone. The emperor's reconquest, 20 years of work by Belisarius, the African coast, the south of Spain, the whole Italian peninsula taken back from the Goths, did not have soldiers left to hold it. Within a generation, the Lombards had walked into northern Italy and stayed. The Visigoths had taken back Spain. The dream of the Mediterranean stitched together under a single Roman roof was lost in that summer. Justinian lived another 23 years. He was emperor without the city he had ruled. The empire he handed to the next man was already smaller than the one he had inherited. This was the first time the empire looked as if it had died. It was not the last. It was not even in the next 800 years the worst. Heraclius is 40 years old, kneeling on the marble floor of Hagia Sophia, holding a small wooden icon of the Virgin Mary in both hands. The candles are lit. The patriarch is praying over him. Outside the church, his ship is loaded and his army is waiting. It is the 4th of April, 622. He is about to do something no Roman emperor has done in 3 centuries. He is going to lead the army himself. For 15 years, he has watched the empire shrink. The Persians under their Shah Khosrow II had taken Antioch, then Damascus. In 614, they had taken Jerusalem and burned it. They had carried away the holiest relic in the Christian world, the wood the chroniclers called the True Cross, and put it in the treasury at Ctesiphon. By 619, Persian armies were standing on the Nile. By 626, Constantinople itself was under siege by the Persians on one side and the Avars, a steppe people from the north, on the other. Heraclius walks out of the church on foot, dressed as a penitent, the icon still in his arms. He gets on the ship. What follows is, by every standard that matters, the First Crusade. He does not call it that. The word will not be invented for another 473 years. But that is what it is. A holy war for a holy city, fought by an emperor with a relic in his hands. 6 years of campaign. He marches through Anatolia, into Armenia, around the southern shore of the Caspian Sea, through territory no Roman army has walked since the time of Trajan. In December of 627, on a battlefield called Nineveh, he breaks the Persian army. 28 Persian standards are taken. The Persian commander does not survive the day. The Shah Khosrow is killed by his own son. The cross comes home. On the 14th of September, 628, Heraclius rides through the Golden Gate of Constantinople in a carriage pulled by 4 elephants. The relic is on the carriage with him. The crowd lies down in the streets, and here is the irony at the center of Byzantine history. 4 years later, in the year 632, a man named Muhammad dies in a town called Medina. Within 10 years, the armies of his followers have taken Syria, Palestine, and Egypt. Every province Heraclius has just won back. He dies in 641, watching it happen. The cross stays in Constantinople. The empire of the cross does not. A man is walking up a dirt road into Constantinople with nothing but a rolled cloak and a small leather satchel. He has come on foot all the way from Heliopolis in Syria. The road behind him is full of refugees. but only he is going to ask to see the emperor. He has a recipe in his head that he has not written down because he does not trust paper. His name is Callinicos. Outside the city, the caliphate is at the gates. It is 674. An Arab fleet has appeared in the Sea of Marmara. The first great siege of Constantinople has begun, and it will last on and off for 4 years. The empire has no answer for it. The Arabs have taken every coast that mattered. The walls of the city are strong, but the walls are not infinite, and the city eats from the sea, and the sea is full of enemy sails. What saves Constantinople is the man on the road. Callinicos is an architect, or an alchemist, or both. He gets his audience. He hands the recipe over. The empire builds it. The recipe is Greek fire. Nobody outside the imperial workshop ever knows what is in it. The formula is a state secret kept by 3 families for 400 years, and it dies with them. We know only what it does. It is thrown from siphons mounted on the prows of Byzantine warships. It strikes the enemy fleet as a stream of liquid flame. It clings to wood. It clings to whatever it touches. It burns on the surface of the water. It cannot be put out with water. It can only be smothered with sand, or with vinegar, or, the chroniclers say, with urine. The Arab fleet of 678 is destroyed. Constantinople holds. 40 years later, in 717, they come back. The brother of the caliph, Maslama, arrives under the walls with 80,000 men and 1,800 ships. The siege lasts a year. Egyptian Christian sailors in the Arab service desert in the night. And in September of 717, the Arab fleet enters the Golden Horn. The fleet they do not know is waiting for them, is inside it. Leo III opens the chain across the harbor. The Byzantine ships come out of cover with the siphons already lit. The chronicler Theophanes says that of the 1,800 ships that came, 5 made it home. The empire kept its weapon, and its city, and its breath for another 300 years. Romanos IV. Diogenes is on horseback at the center of his line, looking across a wide, flat plain in eastern Anatolia, watching the Seljuk cavalry circle in the heat. It is the 26th of August, 1071. He has 50,000 men. The Turks have fewer. He should win this. He turns to give an order. The man he is turning to has already left the field. For 200 years before this morning, the empire had done something nobody expected. It had got bigger. Historians call it the Macedonian Renaissance. A line of soldier emperors took back Syria, took back Crete, broke the Bulgarians in the Balkans. The hardest of them was Basil II. He died in 1025, leaving the empire larger than it had been in 5 centuries. His army was the best in the Mediterranean. The treasury was full. 50 years later, none of it was true. The men who came after Basil cut the army budget to pay for monuments. They settled court favorites in the provinces. They demobilized the frontier. The empire still looked enormous on a map, and on a map is where it stayed. Which is why Romanos is on this plain, and the man he is turning to is gone. The general is Andronikos Doukas, cousin of the man Romanos had pushed off the throne. He walks his men out of the field while Romanos is still fighting. He tells them the emperor is already dead. He leads half the army back to Constantinople. The half that is left is surrounded. Romanos is taken alive. When they bring him into Alp Arslan's tent, the Sultan asks him a question. The dialogue is preserved by a Syriac chronicler, and it has the polish of literature, but the shape of what happened is real. Alp Arslan, what would you do if I had been brought before you like this? Romanos, perhaps I would have killed you. Perhaps I would have paraded you through the streets of Constantinople. Alp Arslan, my punishment is heavier. I forgive you. I let you go. He sends the emperor home with an escort. The emperor never reaches the throne. The Duca's family has moved fast. They tell the city Romanos is dead. They crown somebody else. When he arrives at the gates with the Sultan's escort, they take him. They put a hot iron to his eyes, and he dies of the wound a few months later. Manzikert lost very little ground. It lost the empire's hold on its own army. Within a generation, the highlands of Anatolia were full of Turkish horsemen. The empire would never be that big again. Enrico Dandolo is sitting on a bench at the edge of the Venetian arsenal, his hands folded over the head of a cane, his face turned toward the lagoon he can no longer see. He is in his 90s. He has been blind for 30 years, since a diplomatic visit to Constantinople went badly. The fleet behind him is the largest Venice has ever built. It was built for a crusade. The Crusaders have not come. He has been waiting a long time for this morning. It is 12:02. The plan was to sail to Egypt and retake Jerusalem. The Crusaders had agreed in writing to fill the ships. Maybe a third arrived. They could not pay. So Dandolo, on his bench, makes a suggestion. The crusade cannot pay its debt. Very well. Before going to Egypt, the crusade can attack Zara, a Christian city on the Adriatic. Pope Innocent III excommunicates the entire fleet for the idea. They sail anyway. While they are at Zara, a young Byzantine prince shows up. His name is Alexios Angelos. His father had been emperor, deposed and blinded. The son has escaped west with a proposition. Take me to Constantinople, put me on the throne, and I will pay everything you owe Venice, fund the rest of the crusade, and bring the Eastern Church back into communion with Rome. The Crusaders accept. In June of 1203, a Western fleet sails into the Bosphorus. They force the city to take Alexius back. He cannot pay. He could never have paid. By February of 1204, he has been strangled by his own people, and the Crusaders are sitting outside the walls with no candidate, no money, and a fleet that needs somewhere to go. They decide to take the city for themselves. On the 12th of April, 1204, a hard wind pushes the Venetian ships against the seawall of the Golden Horn. 70 men get over the wall. The defenders break. The gates open. For 3 days, the Crusaders take Constantinople apart. A French knight named Robert de Clary, who was there, wrote that 2/3 of the wealth of this world was in that city, and that the army carried it out by the cartload. They broke the icons to pry the gold out of them. They melted the reliquaries. They placed a woman of the streets on the throne of the patriarch in Hagia Sophia and made her sing. The 4 bronze horses, now in front of St. Mark's in Venice, were taken off a column in the Hippodrome that week. A Byzantine survivor named Nikitas Choniates wrote it all down. He had escaped to Nicaea on foot with his pregnant wife. He could not believe the men who had done this had crossed themselves before they began. The Crusaders elected one of their own, Baldwin of Flanders, Emperor of Constantinople. He was crowned in Hagia Sophia in the Latin Rite. 2 years later, Dandolo died, and they buried him under the same floor. The empire that had survived the empire was, by every measure anyone alive could see, finished. Alexios Strategopoulos is riding at the head of 800 men along the road past the walls of Constantinople. It is July of 1261. He is not supposed to be attacking. He is on a routine sweep. He has just been waved down by a farmer beside the road who has news. The farmer says there is a postern gate near the Golden Horn that nobody is guarding tonight. The capital had fallen 57 years earlier. The empire had not. Within months of the sack, 3 Byzantine governments had declared themselves the Empire-in-Exile. In Nicaea, an aristocrat named Theodore Lascaris had taken the purple. In Trebizond, on the Black Sea coast, the Komnenos family had done the same. In Epirus, the Angeloi had done the same. For 57 years, 3 Byzantine emperors ruled 3 Byzantine empires at once, each calling the others impostors, all of them calling the Latin in Constantinople a thief. The Latin Empire bled money. It had no tax base. It had no fleet. The Crusader emperors sold off the relics of Hagia Sophia to pay for grain. Strategopoulos sends a small party in at night. They cut their way to the main gate from the inside and open it. The empire is back inside its city, almost without a battle. A month later, on the 15th of August, the Nicaean emperor enters through the Golden Gate. His name is Michael VIII Palaiologos. He comes in on foot, barefoot, holding the icon of the Virgin Hodegetria, the lady who shows the way. The icon had been hidden in Nicaea since 1204. The first thing he does as emperor of the restored Constantinople is open the tomb of Enrico Dandolo on the floor of Hagia Sophia. The bones are thrown into the Bosphorus. It is a victory. It is also an illusion. The city Michael has taken back is not the city the Crusaders had taken. Half of it is ruins. The treasury is empty. The fleet that had burned Arabs in the Golden Horn no longer exists. The Anatolian heartland is full of Turks. The empire he is supposed to rebuild is already smaller than the kingdoms around it. The next 200 years would be the longest goodbye in European history. John VIII. Palaiologos is standing on the deck of a Venetian galley in November of 1437, watching the dome of Hagia Sophia recede behind him in the morning haze. He is 45 years old. He is the emperor of the Romans. He is doing something no Byzantine emperor has ever done. He is sailing west. The empire he is leaving behind is barely an empire anymore. It is a city, a few villages along the wall, and a debt. For 150 years, the empire had been bleeding territory. By the year 1300, a Turkish frontier emir named Osman had built a small principality in northwestern Anatolia. His followers called themselves the Osmanli. We call them the Ottomans. Within a generation, they had crossed into Europe. Within 2, they had taken Adrianople and made it their capital. Within 4, they had walked around Constantinople and taken the Balkans behind it. In 1396, the empire lost most of Thrace. In 1402, Constantinople was saved by a stranger. A Mongol warlord named Timur, whom the West would call Tamerlane, met the Ottoman Sultan Bayezid in battle near Ankara. He destroyed the Ottoman army and took the Sultan home in a cage. The empire of the Romans got 50 more years because a Mongol from Samarkand was in the wrong place at the right time, which is why John is on the galley. He sails to Italy. He spends a year and a half at the Council of Florence, arguing with cardinals over the wording of the Creed. In July of 1439, he signs the union of the two churches. The Eastern Church will acknowledge the authority of the Pope. In return, the West will send an army. The army never comes. In Constantinople, the people refuse the union. The monk Mark of Ephesus refuses to sign. A senator named Lucas Notaras, sometime in the last year of the city, said the line that has lasted longer than any of them: "I would rather see the turban of the Turk in the city than the Latin mitre." He was about to. By the spring of 1453, the city had 7,000 defenders. Outside the walls, in tents that stretched for miles, were 80,000 Ottomans, and a young sultan who had been waiting for this since he was 12 years old. Mehmed II is sitting on a folding stool inside a tent at Edirne, listening to a Hungarian engineer describe a cannon. He is 21 years old. The engineer's name is Urban. He has a sketch on a piece of vellum, and he has just told the Sultan a number for what he wants in payment. The Sultan has said yes without flinching. This is the conversation that ends Constantinople. Urban had come to Constantinople first and offered the emperor the same cannon. The emperor could not pay. Urban went east. The cannon he is now going to build is 8 meters long. It will take 60 oxen to drag it. It will throw a stone half a ton in weight, half a kilometer. The siege begins on the 6th of April, 1453. For 53 days, the cannon fires. The walls of Theodosius, which have stood for 1,000 years, begin to crack. The defenders patch them at night with rubble and earth and timber, and the cannon breaks them again at dawn. Inside the city, the omens start. On the 22nd of May, the moon goes into eclipse. An old prophecy says Constantinople will only fall under a waning moon. The next day, after a thunderstorm, a red light is seen at the top of the dome of Hagia Sophia. The chroniclers, Greek and Latin, write it as the glory of God leaving the city. On the night of the 28th of May, the city holds its last liturgy. For the first time in nearly 400 years, Catholics and Orthodox take communion together inside Hagia Sophia. The emperor is there. His name is Constantine the 11th Dragaces Palaiologos. He is the 11th of his name. He stands up before the soldiers and says, in words preserved by his secretary, that to surrender the city is beyond his authority and beyond the authority of anyone who lives in it, and that they have all decided together to die there. The attack comes before dawn. 3 waves. The Bashi Bazouks first, irregular volunteers sent forward to exhaust the defenders. Then the Anatolian infantry. Then the Janissaries, the Sultan's elite. The fighting at the breach is hand to hand for 2 hours. Giovanni Giustiniani, the Genoese commander defending the most damaged section, is wounded by a hand cannon bullet. His men carry him out through a side gate. The line he had been holding breaks. Constantine sees it. He looks once at his officers. He pulls the imperial regalia, the purple cloth, and the golden eagles of the Palaiologoi off his own shoulders. He says, in the version preserved by the Italian Spandugino, that whoever wishes to escape can save himself, and whoever is ready to face death can follow him. Then he runs into the breach with a sword in his hand. He is never seen alive again. His body is never found. The Ottomans search for him for 3 days and cannot identify him among the fallen. Some accounts said he had fallen in the first minutes. Some said he had fought until the end. Nobody could prove either one. The city fell. For 3 days, the soldiers who had taken it took it apart. On the 3rd day, the Sultan rode through the gate of San Romano, dismounted at the door of Hagia Sophia, and went inside. He gave one order. A man with a brush was sent up to paint over the mosaics of Christ. The church became a mosque before sundown. The empire that had survived the empire was, after 1,123 years, gone. Bessarion is bent over a writing desk in a stone cell in Rome, copying a passage of Plato into a fresh codex. The candle is low. His hand is steady. He is 65 years old. He is a Greek monk who became a Catholic cardinal in the long failed effort to unite the 2 churches. Tonight, like every other night, he is one Greek manuscript closer to saving the past. The empire is gone. The empire's books are not. In the months and years after 1453, refugees arrive in Italy. Some are monks, some are merchants, some are aristocrats with their fortunes sewn into the linings of their cloaks. Almost all of them are carrying books. Bessarion had left earlier. He had spent his life copying Greek manuscripts and buying them from the men coming out of the East. By the time he died in 1472, he had given 700 Greek manuscripts to Venice. They became the founding collection of the Biblioteca Marciana on the Piazza San Marco. He was not alone. John Argyropoulos taught Greek in Florence. His most famous student was a young man named Leonardo da Vinci. Demetrios Chalkokondyles printed the first Greek edition of Homer in Italy in 1488. Plato, Aristotle, Euclid, Archimedes, Thucydides, all of them came west in the wooden trunks of men who had walked out of a city that was being painted over. The Renaissance the Italians thought they were inventing was, in a precise sense, a Byzantine afterlife. In 1472, the same year Bessarion died, a young Byzantine princess named Sophia Palaeologina sailed north. She was the niece of Constantine XI. She was the last living trace of the imperial family. She had been raised in Rome under the protection of the Pope. He sent her to Moscow to marry the Grand Prince of Muscovy, Ivan III. She brought with her the double-headed eagle of the Palaeologoi, and the Russians put it on their flag. Some still bear it. 40 years later, a monk named Philotheus of Pskov wrote a letter to her grandson. He wrote that 2 Romes had fallen. The third was standing. A fourth there would not be. The Russian word for the man who ruled it was Tsar. It was the Russian way of saying Caesar. The empire that had called itself the Romans for 1100 years now had 3 heirs. The Greeks, who would fight a war of independence under the double-headed eagle of Constantinople. The Russians, whose Tsars wore the Caesar's title, and the Turks, who had taken the city and would govern it for another 470 years. 3 civilizations claim Byzantium. None of them is wrong. We have been calling them Byzantines for almost 5 centuries. They never were. They were Romans, in their own mouths and their own coins and their own laws, in every edict their chancellery ever issued, and every treaty their ambassadors ever signed, until the morning the city was taken. Every time in this film we have called them Byzantines. Somewhere in the air there has been a quiet correction. They would have answered to Romaioi. We would have been understood and gently set right. So what was Byzantium? It was the longest argument in history about what Rome meant. It survived the fall of Rome by 1,000 years and 23 days. During those 1,000 years, it changed its language and kept its name. It changed its borders and kept its name. It changed its faith, its army, and its idea of God, and it kept its name. It was sacked by its own faith. It was plagued by its own ports. It was betrayed by its own armies, and it never once stopped calling itself by the name of a city it had never seen. The empire ended on a Tuesday in May. The argument did not. 3 civilizations claim the inheritance. The Greeks, who fought a war of independence in the 1820s under the double-headed eagle of Constantinople, and who walk past the ruins of Mistras every summer in the way that you walk past your grandfather's house. The Russians, whose czars took the title of Caesar from a princess who arrived in Moscow 19 years after the fall, and who built the Kremlin cathedrals in the years that followed with Italians trained on Byzantine geometry. The Turks, who renamed the city, kept the city, and shaped 4 centuries of Mediterranean history out of it. The dome of every Ottoman imperial mosque is the dome of Hagia Sophia, copied and copied and copied across an empire that called itself Roman. In Arabic, for as long as the Romans had called it Roman in Greek. And there is a fourth heir, the one nobody mentions. Every Greek manuscript that came into Italy in the wooden trunks of refugees became a book in a Renaissance library. Plato, Aristotle, Homer, Thucydides, Euclid, Archimedes. The West rediscovered itself in the texts the East had been copying by hand for 1,000 years. Every European who has ever read Plato has read him through the patience of a Byzantine monk. The Italian Renaissance was, in a precise and material sense, a Byzantine afterlife. The men who would build the modern West were taught their alphabet by a culture they thought had ended. And then there is the emperor whose body was never found. Greek peasants, after 1453, said that an angel had come down at the last moment, turned him to marble, and hidden him in a cave beneath the Golden Gate. They called him the Marble Emperor. They said he is sleeping. They said that one day, when the time is right, he will wake up, take back his city, and the empire will rise again. They have been saying it in the same village squares for 19 generations. The cave is still there. The story is still told. Whether you believe in marble emperors or not, here is the strange thing. The empire that survived the empire by 1,000 years has now been gone for 573 years. That is not very long by Byzantine standards. They had emperors who were exiled longer than that. The marble emperor is still on time. Next, we go where the empire could not reach. While the Romans of Constantinople were arguing about the wording of their creed, while the cannons of Mehmed were being dragged toward their walls, on the other side of the world, a different civilization was navigating an ocean that had no name in any European language. A triangle of water, larger than Europe and Asia put together. 3 corners, Hawaii in the north, New Zealand in the south, Easter Island in the east, 8 million square miles of open sea, and inside it, a people who, for 1,000 years, without maps, without compasses, without writing, read the stars in the night sky and the shape of waves on water, and colonized every habitable island they could find inside that triangle. They built no Hagia Sophia. They left no Justinian. They wrote nothing down, and they crossed distances no European ship would attempt for another 500 years. A double canoe with a sail of woven leaves carried families from one volcanic dot to the next, navigating by stars they had memorized from childhood, by the way the swell broke around an island 100 miles below the horizon, by the flight of birds at dawn. How they did it is, in some places, still an argument. That they did it is a fact. The Polynesians subscribed to the long thread. The next civilization is being prepared. Every empire ends. The thread does not.